welcome back to my channel, Jamie Sage Knits, where I talk about all things knitting, crafting, yarn, fiber arts, but mostly knitting. Today I'll be talking about my recent experience with the New York City yarn crawl. I was able to make it to 7 out of the 9 featured stores, and I'll be talking about my experience at each, what I was lucky enough to buy at each store, or most of the stores that I went to, and also how likely I am to revisit any of the stores. And just to give a little bit of context on the New York City yarn crawl, as I mentioned, there were 9 stores selected across Manhattan and Brooklyn. There was a grand prize that you were able to enter for if you found the featured object containing kind of a secret word at each of the stores. I knew going in, just in terms of my planning for the weekend, that I wasn't going to be able to make it to all of them, so I didn't necessarily prioritize that aspect. But each store also had their own individual raffle that you could enter. So I did enter the raffle at each store that I visited, and we'll see what happens with that. But really my main goal was just to get to visit more stores around New York City. It was great motivation for that purpose. I had only been to a couple of these stores in the past, and so it was great to be able not only to visit so many, but also in a short time so that I could really compare the different stores. Also, all of the stores had at least 10% off all of their yarn, so it was a good opportunity to buy a few things, especially because I am someone who tends to buy my yarn kind of in bulk online for specific projects, and it was really cool to have this experience of buying a few things at these stores and getting to look forward to making some more creative and small projects. I do tend to have this style of yarn purchasing mostly for like budget reasons. At least at this point for me, it still doesn't really feel realistic to buy, hand-dyed yarn or indie yarn for an entire large project like a sweater, and that is the majority of the projects I like working on. But it's kind of nice to have this inspiration and this motivation to make some smaller projects and kind of go back to my roots in that way. And so as I go along, I'll share a little bit about what I'm envisioning for each skein of yarn that I purchased. I also am planning to kind of go in reverse order in terms of how likely I am to revisit each of these stores. And I want to note, this isn't my evaluation of like how good these stores are or like whether you should go. I think all of these stores were really great in their own way. I enjoyed going to all of them. And if I were in the neighborhood, I certainly would drop into any of these stores again. However, because they are pretty far apart, I'm really assessing kind of like how positive my experience was, kind of what the vibe was and how well that vibe like sat with me, and also how likely I would be to go out of my way and kind of make a trip to this store just for that yarn store, not just like because I was in the neighborhood. Hopefully that makes sense. I just thought it would be fun to kind of assess in this way because all of these stores were nice, all of the employees were nice, all of them had a great selection of yarns. So there wasn't anything negative there, but I'm just going to talk through each one in terms of my experience and share a little bit about the vibe, the yarn selection, and then share what I got. So starting with the one I would be least likely to go out of my way for, that would be West Village Knit and Needle. The reasons that I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way is because it was pretty small, probably the smallest of the stores that I visited. About half of the materials were for embroidery, so even within that small store, there wasn't as much yarn. And that's basically the whole reason that it was kind of at the bottom of this list. They had really cool samples and even some garments for sale. And interestingly, they told me they only carry natural fibers, so that's something unique about them. I really liked their collection of Malabrigo, and in general they have a number of brands including Malabrigo, Blue Sky Fibers, Chickadee, Fino, Lana Gatto, and more. However, I would say they did maybe lean a little bit more in the ratio towards more like commercial or large scale companies. They did have a couple of more indie brands. And overall, their selection just wasn't quite as broad, but I think they did have some really nice stuff. And personally, I took the opportunity to pick up some Malabrigo yarn. I am familiar with this yarn, but I don't think I've ever purchased Malabrigo before, and they were having a 20% off sale. So I thought it was a good opportunity to pick some up. And I really love the color. I got 3 skeins of this, which is the Malabrigo worsted yarn in the color 034 Orchid. This is 100% merino wool. It's non-superwash, and it has 192 meters per 100 grams. It was originally $14 per skein, and like I said, it was 20% off. So I was pretty pleased with that purchase, and I really think this orchid color is quite beautiful. I got 3 skeins, and you'll see with some of my other purchases as well, I'm thinking of making a set of headbands, mitts, or like wrist warmers, fingerless gloves, things like that, kind of small projects for my bachelorette party, which is coming up. And so I had asked all of my friends, they don't know what it's for, so hopefully none of them watch this, but I had asked them all, including like some other logistical details, what color they would like for kind of accessories or things like that, and several of them said purple. So I got 3 skeins of the same color, and I'm planning to see what kind of small object I can make out of the 3 skeins. I'm hoping that I'll get, maybe 3 or 4 projects out of it, so I'll have to find something that doesn't call for too much yarn. I think that'll be feasible, and especially because I don't have too much time either, that will work out well to make kind of small projects. And I think the yarn is so beautiful how it's like a little bit variegated, so even a simple project that will be quick to knit up should really let this yarn shine, and it is so soft. I'm also thinking about, I have like some leftover white mohair from a previous project, so I could knit up a swatch and see what it would be like to hold that together with this and even get a bit more, kind of have the yarn go a little further. So I will see how that looks and how that feels, and maybe I'll make 1 or 2 things with the mohair and then 1 or 2 things without, in case some people are more sensitive to mohair. But that was my experience at West Village Knit and Needle. The place in kind of 6th place, or the store in 6th place for me, was Brooklyn General. They actually had a really good selection of yarn. I would say it was one of the larger stores that I visited. They also have fabric there, and really the main thing that threw me off was like the lighting. I felt like they had kind of dim lighting, and I didn't love the way the yarns were set up. It just wasn't like the most intuitive or the most pleasant to me compared to some of the other stores. So those are the reasons that for me, the vibe didn't sit as well. But like I said, I think they have a great selection. I think it's definitely a store worth visiting. I just don't know if I would go out of my way to return. They did have a really broad selection of brands, including Spin Cycle, Knitting for Olive, which I had never seen like stocked in person, so that was cool. La Bien Amie, or Amy, Brooklyn Tweed, Sea Change Fibers, and more. I got this Illimani Sabri yarn in the color Bone. This is a yarn that is 85% organic cotton, 15% baby alpaca, and it is so soft and lovely. It's kind of a loose 2-ply yarn, and it has 400 meters per 100 grams, so a fingering weight. It was originally $15. They were having 10% off, so I got it for $13.50. I'm kind of wishing I had picked up a second skein. I was going back and forth. I was trying to stay in a budget and be reserved because I knew I was visiting so many stores. But I'm wanting to make a little like cute tank top or kind of whimsical feminine shirt, tank top, something for my wedding festivities, which will be in the spring. And I was trying to convince myself, with 400 meters, I could make something. And I still do think it'll be feasible. It just is a little bit tight. So I wish that I had gotten 2. Maybe I'll go back. But maybe I'll knit up a swatch and see what my gauge is with this and see what I could do. And I am kind of leaning towards, I don't remember the name of this design, but I'm picturing in my head, and I'll put a photo in. And I really like how it's like a cute little tank with a scallop edge and some kind of simple details, but it calls for, I think, a worsted weight yarn, and so I would have to probably get another skein of this and hold it double or something like that. It's also bottom up, which I would not do because I would want to, make sure the top is all set and then just knit down until I run out of yarn. So I would have to finagle the pattern and kind of reverse engineer it to knit from top down. So maybe I'll like draft my own design inspired by this one for fingering weight, or maybe I will just find a different pattern that is more appropriate for this yarn. But I really love this one, and it's kind of unique amongst the skeins that I got. I don't think I got anything else that was with cotton, so I'm really excited to knit this one up. The next store that I'll talk about is Downtown Yarns. So this was in kind of like Lower East Side, East Village area. It had a really fun vibe. I loved their displays. It was a pretty small store as well. The yarn was going up really high, so it looked really cool, but you weren't able to reach a lot of it and like touch it, which for me is one of the most fun parts of visiting a yarn store. So I think that's why it's a little bit lower on my list. But there was something really fun about the vibe. It was just kind of like a bustling atmosphere. They had a couple of yarn winders running. Like, I don't know, there's just something fun about it. But it's not necessarily one that I would go out of my way. I think I would be excited to drop in if I were in the neighborhood. They had a pretty good selection of fiber content. They had the most kind of upscale yarns that I noticed, like some cashmere, which was really soft and beautiful, but a bit out of my price range. They had brands like Isager, Malabrigo, Plymouth Yarn, Hedgehog Fibers, Ching Fiber, and more. And I actually didn't wind up purchasing anything here. Nothing was really speaking to me. And like I said, maybe if I had been able to access some of the yarn that was higher up, that would be more compelling. But I wound up just kind of looking around, and I enjoyed my visit, but I didn't purchase anything. The next store that I'll talk about, so this is kind of middle of the road, I probably would go back here. Like I would go out of my way to go back here, so that's where we're starting to merge into that realm. This was Woolyn in Brooklyn. It was pretty spacious. The staff was probably the friendliest of any store that I visited, but I also visited this one on Friday, whereas the other ones I went Saturday and Sunday, so maybe it was because the store wasn't quite as busy. They had more energy going into the yarn crawl, but I will say it was probably the friendliest staff. They had a nice selection of hand-dyed yarns, sock yarns, and probably the best selection of fun stitch markers out of any of the stores that I went to. The brands that they had included kind of more like commercial or larger dyers like Barocco, Kelburn Woolens, and then ranging into like Earth, Tributary, Yarn Over New York, Blue Sky Fibers, and more. So they had a really great span, I think, of different yarns like indie dyers and hand-dyed yarns. I got this skein from Northwood Fibers. This is their butternut sock yarn in the color Reef Life, which I think makes sense because it's this like beautiful turquoise with some like green, purples. And this yarn is 80% superwash merino, 20% nylon. It is a 2-ply yarn, and it has 366 meters and 100 grams. It was originally $32, but I got it for $29 because they were having a 10% sale. And I am planning to use this probably for a Musselburgh hat. I've been wanting to try out that design, and I just think it will be a great way to show off this beautiful, really fun yarn. And I'm just really curious to see what we'll get. I mean, I'll hold it up close. You can see there's such a beautiful range of colors, but I think it's very cohesive, and I think it will be fun for a hat like that. And I think that will show off the yarn well. So I'm really happy with this one. It's just so fun to look at. I think it'll be really fun to knit up as well. Next store I'll talk about is Annie's. This was the biggest store by far. It's in the Upper East Side, and they had, I would say, a lot of like commercial yarn, but they had a mix of commercial and more boutique suppliers. They had brands like Cascade, Woolyn Gang, which I had never seen in person either, so that was cool, Malabrigo. They had some sale bins throughout the store. I'm not sure if that's typical or if that's specific to the yarn crawl weekend, but I could definitely see myself going back, so I'll note if they have the sale bins in the future. I do think that this store would be a great one for, like, it's one of the ones I would recommend the most just because it is so large. They have a really good array of different fibers, of different brands, of different price points. And I think especially if someone was like a beginner knitter, this would be a great store to go to just because they have such a wide selection. You could find probably whatever you're looking for any project. And they seem to have some options for like support and guidance on learning how to knit. They also had some embroidery supplies as well, I believe. Um, and so I'll note if I go back if they have the sale bins in the future, because that is where I got this skein. So this is the Yakima yarn from Plymouth Yarn. The color is teal, and this is 85% fine superwash merino and 15% yak. It was discounted from $30 to $18, so I was pretty pleased with that. And this has 350 meters and 100 grams. And this is another one that I'm planning to use to make gifts because a couple of my friends said they would like a teal accessory. I think this is such a beautiful kind of color with some depth to it. It's really soft and lovely, probably because of, the combination of the superwash merino and the yak. I did ask them in the store, like, does having yak cancel out the superwash merino, or like the fact that you can wash it? And they weren't really sure. But I feel like if I make a headband or like fingerless gloves, they're not going to need to machine wash it anyway. So yeah, I'm really excited to knit this one up. I might see if I have any mohair that could go along with this just to like bulk it out and make it go further, but we will see. And I'm really happy with this purchase as well. All right, now we're getting into my top two. So Annie's made it in as number 3. Number 2, I would say, was Knitty City in the Upper West Side. The store isn't huge, but they managed to pack in a really wide selection, and it does go up high, but unlike Downtown Fibers, I found it a lot easier to access some of the higher shelves. So this really appealed to me because it just had a really fun vibe. I loved the way they organized it. It was very clearly labeled and clearly laid out in terms of how it moved, from fingering weight to sport, Aran, worsted, bulky. They had a whole section of sock weight and fingering yarns that was really beautiful and fun to explore. And I think they also have like a little library section or like an area of knitting books, which I didn't necessarily notice at other stores. So if anything, I would say they probably had like the biggest selection of knitting books, and some of the others didn't really have noticeable books. If they did, it was like a very small section. And they had some fun stitch markers as well. So they had a really wide array of commercial and small dyers, including Cascade, Malabrigo, Barocco, Plymouth Yarns, Lana Grossa, Rowan, Lang, Earth Yarns, Yarn Over New York, Murky Depths, Hugh Made. I loved their Malabrigo selection. And in general, I just thought they had such a great selection of so many different yarns. They had a bunch of fun hand-dyed yarns, especially in the sock weight, fingering weight section. And they also had a trunk show. A couple of the stores had this, like at Woolyn, they had some fun trunk shows as well. But they had, on the day I visited, on Sunday at Knitty City, the Woolyn Wench brand was there. And I really liked getting to talk to her a little bit and see some of her yarns. And I wound up picking up one skein from her. This is a 90% superwash merino, 10% silk, 4-ply yarn that I'm planning to use for socks. It has 224 meters and 100 grams, and I bought it for $30. And I just think it is so beautiful. It's not showing up quite as vibrant on camera. Like, it's really rich and vibrant in person. And she had opened it up for me so I could see. I just think it's going to be so beautiful, and I think socks, like just a plain stockinette sock, will be a great way to show off the fun colors and variegation in this yarn. And she was very patient with me as I looked through lots of her different yarn options, and I finally selected this one. At Knitty City, from their own selection, I also was tempted by another of the Malabrigo yarns, and I chose the yarn weight Mecca, which is a bulky weight yarn. And this is in the color 658 Zinnias. I think it's so beautiful. This one actually is showing up a bit better on camera, but it's even like richer in person, the color of it. And this is another one that I'm planning to use for the projects for my friends. One of them requested like an autumnal color, and another one asked for like magenta or bright colors. And I think this one does have, it's a little bit like more pinky. It's, I think, showing up more red on camera, but I would call it magenta in person. So I think this one is so beautiful. I'm like really tempted to just keep it and use it for myself, but I think I will use it for those projects. I don't know if I mentioned this one is superwash, which is interesting. Just so soft and beautiful. I had them spin this one in the store, but for the other ones, I did want to save them in the skeins, especially to show. Just because I don't know, I like having the skeins. I like how it looks a bit more than the caked yarn. But yeah, I don't know if I mentioned this one is 119 meters per 100 grams. And yeah, I think this one is going to be so fun to knit with because the color is just so beautiful. All right, in the number one spot is Argyle. So this is another store in Brooklyn. And I almost like surprised myself by putting this first, but like every store that I compared to it in my mind, it just wasn't quite as fun. Like this one, the vibe of it was just really great. It was really like brightly lit, which I realized I enjoy in a yarn store. Like it was bright, airy, compact, but a really nice selection. And I would say what made this stand out to me and what would motivate me to most go out of my way to visit this one in the future was their selection of indie yarn dyers and hand dyed yarns. So because I order a lot of my yarn online, what most motivates me to go to a yarn store in person is if they have put together a really beautiful selection of, you know, hand dyed yarns, indie yarns, things that it's harder to get online, or at least that you would have to like get from all these different places, and they bring it together and just like collate it in a really beautiful way. And that is what stood out to me about this store. They just had some really nice high quality fibers, some really interesting like combinations of fibers in some of the yarns, and a beautiful color selection. So some of the brands that I saw there did include some like more commercial brands like Barocco and Malabrigo, and then going into like Madeline Tosh, Juniper Moon, Ching Fiber, Hedgehog Fibers, Luminous Brooklyn. And this was probably the one where like I wanted to get the most things, but I restrained myself. And I wound up getting this skein from the Wandering Flock. And this is their fingering weight yarn in the color Terrace Bridge. It's 100% superwash extra fine merino, and it has 365 meters in 100 grams. So it was originally $33. I got it for 10% off, so around $30. And this is really soft, really lovely. It has a white base with some very faint lavender, and then ranging in like some medium blues into some deeper navies. And I just thought this one was so beautiful, and I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with it yet, but I just couldn't resist it. I am thinking of making a 9 p.m. tank with it, but I feel like there's something a bit different about this merino versus the Knitting for Olive 100% merino that I have used to make that tank in the past. So there's just something a little fuzzier about this one that makes me doubt whether it would be good for a summer knit, even though usually I find 100% merino fine for summer knits. Like this shirt I'm wearing right now is 100% merino, but it just feels different. So I'll have to think about that, and I'll think about if there's a different pattern I could knit that would really show off this beautiful yarn. I like the idea of the 9 p.m. tank because it's pretty plain, pretty much stockinette, really fun and quick to knit up. But we'll see. I might find a different pattern, like maybe more of an accessory to knit with this one. But that is everything. So we made it all the way through those 7 stores. I didn't have the chance to visit Cleo's, or there's another one with Brooklyn in the name. Like I visited Brooklyn General, but maybe another one is like the Brooklyn Yarn Shop or something like that. Those two were just like too far into Brooklyn from where I am. So I will hopefully have the chance to visit those two in the future and maybe add them into my mental ranking. But for now, this kind of describes how I experienced each of these stores, which one stood out to me. Like I mentioned before, I would kind of recommend going to any of these if you're in the neighborhood, and then maybe based on what I shared, you can decide if you would ever like to go out of your way to visit any of them if you're in New York City. So thank you so much for watching. And I realized I never went into detail on the shirt that I'm wearing. So this is the Mixed Rib Cami by Handmade by Florence. I used the Knitting for Olive merino in the color lavender blue, and I went into more detail on this project in my first podcast, so I'd recommend checking that out if you're interested in learning more. But thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed hearing a little bit about my New York City yarn crawl experience and my thoughts on each store and also what I had the chance to buy. So thank you again, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye.